Welcome to your Mythology Book Club. I'm Daniel, and I'm a Greek mythology enthusiast. In this series, we're covering the Iliad, and in this episode, we'll tackle books 10 and 11. Book 10. This is a weird one. It features sneaking around in the dark, spy versus spy action, some horse theft, and a whole mass murder. And it's topped off with a ritual bathing in the sea to purify them from all the sneaking and murdering. Not the theft, though. Theft is fine. Looting is always what our heroes are up to. Now, I see Book 10 as a very late addition to the Iliad. In my opinion, it's quite possibly the last thing that was inserted in after the rest of the story was complete. And I'll also point out before we get started here that I find some of the details in Book 10 to feel unintentionally anachronistic, as if the writer was trying really hard to put in details to make it feel like a remote past that the writer themselves didn't actually know much about. Now, Book 10 has long stood out among scholars who question the idea of a single composition of the Iliad by a single man named Homer. The idea that one person sat down and wrote the Iliad. There's not a lot of support for that idea anymore, more likely composed over time. And Book 10 is typically cited as the least Homeric book in the whole Iliad, the most different. Now, I can't read ancient Greek, so I don't have a sense of how the poetry itself differs from the rest of the Iliad. But a lot of the ideas in Book 10, and even the choice of dress for many of the characters, as we'll see, certainly I can tell that these decisions feel like they were made by someone other than the author of any other part of the Iliad. Now, there is a scholia note in a manuscript of the Iliad known as the Townley manuscript. This dates back to 1059. And in this, it says of Book 10, they say that this, meaning Book 10, this epic composition was arranged separately by Homer and not to be part of the Iliad, but it was arranged into that poem by Pisistratos. And Pisistratos was a leader of Athens in the 6th century BCE. And this note fits with that general idea that it wasn't until that relatively late date that the complete Iliad that we now have it was assembled. Most estimates place Homer, or the Homeric school, the Homeric tradition, in the 8th or 9th century. So this note seems to be trying to bridge that gap between the idea of maintaining the fiction of a single author named Homer and the more obvious facts that some parts of the Iliad, Book 10 in particular, just seem too different to have come from a single hand. You can read a lot more about the scholarship behind Book 10 in an article that I linked in the show's notes by Dew, Casey, and Ebbett. So with all the doubt about how Homeric 10 is or is not, it's actually one of my very favorite books. I always look forward to getting to it. It's a lot of fun with the aforementioned murdering, sneaking, horse theft. And as we go along, I'll talk even more about what I appreciate, some of the details in this really unique episode, regardless of who wrote it and when. So Book 10 opens right after 9 had ended, with the Greeks going to bed after having failed to win over Achilles to rejoin the fight. So we hear that now beside the ships, the other leaders of the whole Achaean host were sleeping all night long, by soft sleep overcome. But Agamemnon, son of Atreus, shepherd of the host, sweet sleep held not. So many things he debated in his mind. And even as when the Lord of fair-tressed Hera lighteth, fashioning either a mighty rain unspeakable, or hail, or snow, or when the flakes sprinkle all the plowed lands, or fashioning perchance wide mouth of bitter war. Even so often his breast groaned Agamemnon from the very deep of his heart, and his spirits trembled within him. And whensoever he looked toward that Trojan plain, he marveled at the many fires that blazed in front of Ilios, and at the sounds of flutes and pipes, and the noise of men. But whensoever to the ships he glanced, and to the host of the Achaeans, then rent he many a lock clean forth from his head to Zeus that is above, and greatly groaned his noble heart. So Agamemnon is restless. He's unable to sleep. He's compared to Zeus when Zeus is upset, flashing lightning, preparing a great storm. But instead, of course, as a man, Agamemnon is groaning aloud, worried about the morning and the possible destruction of the army of the Greeks and their ships. So Agamemnon decides to go visit Nestor, whom he must have just spoken with not more than a couple hours ago at most, to see if Nestor has somehow come up with some ideas to save them all that he's just not shared for whatever reason. Agamemnon wraps himself up in a lion skin cloak like Heracles and grabs a spear. And this is the first of several strange animal skin clothing choices that we're going to see in Book 10. I will be pointing them out as we go. Prior to Book 10, the only time we had seen a similar garment was early on when Paris was wearing such a thing during his challenge of Menelaus to a duel. And in that context, it seems like the author was using it to make him seem like he was maybe a little more concerned about his appearance than a manly Bronze Age man should be. But in this book, animal skin clothing seems to be used as just something that everyone wears. But it does seem, I will point out that it does seem like the animals chosen will say something about the characters. See if you agree. Coincidentally, Menelaus also can't sleep and also arms himself and also puts on a cloak made from a big cat. In this case, Menelaus is going to wear a spotted leopard. Now that's reminiscent to me of Dionysus. And he goes to Agamemnon's tent while his older brother is still dressing. Menelaus's appearance and this show of initiative really pleases Agamemnon, who feels that he's always looking out for his younger brother. And Menelaus sort of spills the beans on Book 10's plot here, which is the idea that they, the Greek leaders, are going to send someone out to spy on the Trojan camp to get an idea of what they're up against. Now, nowhere else in the Iliad is there any kind of espionage or guerrilla warfare. Otherwise, it's all very have at you, direct style battle with a lot of very unstrategic corpse looting thrown in. So this, to me, is an argument that it's a late addition. The fact that there is some degree of military strategy at play. And I'll also point out that here that this is the first inkling that we're getting of a minor recharacterization of Menelaus in Book 10. And we'll be looking at that a bit more as we go along. So now, Agamemnon and Menelaus, after discussing all the damage that Hector's already done to their army and how very clearly favored Hector is by Zeus right now, Agamemnon now asks Menelaus to go off and find the other Greek leaders, Idomeneus and Meriones, the leaders of the Cretans, and to wait there with them for Agamemnon to arrive with Nestor. Agamemnon doesn't want them all to be running around in the dark and missing one another. And just before he goes off, Agamemnon asks Menelaus to wake everyone that he sees along the way and just asks them to stay awake the rest of the night. We've got to be on guard here. The Trojans have never left the field, and we are more vulnerable than we've ever been. As we've seen before, Agamemnon, he is a very insecure leader. This is his anxiety at work, although tonight, certainly it is well justified. They are in a really dangerous situation here. The Trojans fill the plain with their campfires, and with Zeus so obviously on their side now, the morning could be really bad for the Greeks. So now Agamemnon reaches Nestor's camp, but that old man is already awake and calls out into the darkness when he hears Agamemnon approaching. "Who art thou that farest alone by the ships, through the camp in the dark night, when other mortals are sleeping? Seekest thou one of thy mules, or of thy comrades? Speak, and come not silently upon me. What need hast thou?" Agamemnon replies, but he doesn't just come out and say, "Hey, Nestor, I want advice." Instead, he talks about how Zeus always heaps trouble on me, and how obviously neither of us can sleep. Right, Nestor? And he asks Nestor, "Hey, do you want to come join me? I'm going to go inspect the sentries, check up on the security, make sure that the guards are staying awake." I'm not sure why Agamemnon is beating around the bush here. As we've seen, Nestor gives unsolicited advice all of the time, and he would be delighted that someone is actually asking to hear what he has to say. Nestor says he doesn't think that all of Zeus's plans for the benefit of the Trojans will end up happening, especially if Achilles ends up rejoining the fight. And Nestor says that the two of them, he and Nestor and Agamemnon, should go and wake up all the other leaders And he names several of them, but then he goes out of his way to badmouth Menelaus. This is the recharacterization of Menelaus here. But Menelaus will I blame, dear as he is, and worshipful, yea, even if thou be angry with me, nor will I hide my thought, for that he slumbereth, and to thee alone has left the toil. Now should he be toiling among all the chiefs and beseeching them, for need no longer tolerable is coming upon us. Now, to me, this seems unnecessary. We don't really see Menelaus as being lazy anywhere. He's stepped up and volunteered for that duel with Paris early on. He's been involved with the battles all along. So I definitely feel that we've got a recharacterization of here in this book, which is, to me, another subtle clue that Book 10 was written by someone other than the author of whoever wrote the rest of it, or whatever group of people wrote the rest of it. This is written by someone completely else. And, of course, it's unfair just to Menelaus because we know that Menelaus isn't asleep right now. He's off doing the kinds of stuff that Nestor would have him do right now, which is waking up all the other chiefs. And Agamemnon does speak up and defend Menelaus, but not very strongly. He says his brother does leave work undone, but only because he's always looking to me, his older brother, for guidance. Again, that's not something we really see anywhere else. So Book 10, again, this is just this weird anti-Menelaus bent. My own personal perception of Menelaus as a character overall in most of the Iliad is that he's a pretty solid warrior, and he doesn't really do anything shameful, but he's not exciting, and he's certainly not a favorite of mine the way Odysseus is. But Agamemnon does go on to say that not only did Menelaus wake up first, but that he's been given orders to rouse the rest of the camp. I, Agamemnon, have given Menelaus orders to go off and tell everyone to wake up. And Nestor responds that it's good that Agamemnon gave Menelaus the orders to rouse everyone up so that the men won't contradict him or ignore him. So Menelaus is going to go around saying, hey, Agamemnon sent me to wake you up. Nestor's implying that the other men would somehow ignore Menelaus if this order was coming directly from him rather than from Agamemnon. And it's just another little dig there. So Nestor goes on to they go out to wake more of the men, and he does seem to have a plan in mind, but he's not sharing it yet. The setup to this book, it feels kind of contrived and unnatural and drawn out. Like the author obviously has an end in mind, and this stuff is just in there to get us from point A to point B. Like the characters just feel like puppets, and they're being moved around. They just don't feel as real to me as they usually do. Now, when we get to the second half, or the second portion, the real meat of Book 10, then those characters, they feel like their real selves. So just trust me, it's worth sticking through. So without having really yet explained his plan, which is itself unusual for Nestor, he first wakes up Odysseus, who calls out in a similar way to Nestor was awakened, Who is thou in the darkness? Then he has to literally kick Diomedes to get him awake. But now, as contrived as it's been, we've got our two protagonists for Book 10, Odysseus and Diomedes. They're going to be the stars of the show. The author of Book 10, speaking in the voice of Nestor now, lays out the situation for us with a metaphor that I enjoy because it's still so common now. Nestor tells Diomedes that, for now to all of us it standeth on a razor's edge, either pitiful ruin for the Achaeans or life. How many modern movies use that same phrase, the razor's edge? Oh, and by the way, we're not quite done with the setup yet, because now Diomedes gears up. He grabs his spear and he puts on a lion skin cloak. So he must be awesome like Agamemnon, right? In the eyes of the author, he's got the king of the cats on. I don't recall any other times that I've seen Diomedes wearing a lion skin. This is the third big cat coat this book. So now they set out. Nestor, Diomedes, and Odysseus. They're going to meet with the others, with Menelaus and so forth. So Nestor now actually on the way does check up on the sentries. We thought he was just going to wake up the chiefs, but he does. He's going around reminding everyone to stay awake. Don't sleep, like we had all decided to do at the end of the last book that we all just finished. So now Nestor leads these guys through the gate in the wall, across the fortified ditch. Remember, there's the ditch with the spikes in it. out to the open field where in the distance the Trojans have their camps all around, all the campfires filling the plain. Now, why would they all just follow him out past their defenses without asking him why? It certainly doesn't seem necessary to go all the way out here. I get going to the defenses. They were checking on them, and Agamemnon was anxious and yada yada. But anyway, so the other kings of the Greeks are already out here. So now we're all here. Both Aiases are here, and Meriones, and Antilochos, and presumably Idomeneus. Of course, Agamemnon, Menelaus. Hey, we're all here. So it's here, beyond their defenses for no reason, in the dark of night, possibly within earshot of the enemy lurking about, right, that Nestor finally reveals his plan. "Oh, friends, is there then no man that would trust to his own daring spirit to go among the great-hearted Trojans, if perchance he might take some straggler of the enemy, yea, or hear, perchance, some rumor among the Trojans, and what things they devise among themselves, whether they are fain to abide there by the ships away from the city, or will retreat again to the city, now that they have conquered the Achaeans? All this might such an one learn, and back to us come scathless. Great would be his fame under heaven among all men, and a goodly gift will be given him. For all the best men that bear sway by the ships, each and all of them will give him a black ewe, with her lamb at her foot. And ever will he be present at feasts and clan drinkings." So that is tempting. So the big plan here is to get a volunteer to go out and spy on the enemy, since the Greeks are in dire straits. The first time the Trojans are camped out in the field, it's scary because they're so confident that they didn't feel that they need to go back into their city, but it's an opportunity because this is the first time that spying is really an option. The enemy's not back within their walls. So Diomedes immediately volunteers to go, but he says he wants someone else to go with him, as they'll have better judgment if he has another person out there with him. And I've already kind of spilled the beans on who's going with him, but suffice to say that several of the chiefs are said to be eager to join him, and Agamemnon suggests that Diomedes just choose whichever one he thinks is best, and not to let any other considerations come into play, just pick who's best for the job right now. And Diomedes, of course, as you know, chooses Odysseus, saying that he's always ready for a fight, and Athene, she loves him. And Odysseus, of course, accepts, but doesn't really need the encouragement. He doesn't need the praise. He's very practical, and he responds, "Son of Tydeus, praise me not overmuch, neither blame me aught, for thou speakest thus among the Argives that themselves know all. But let us be going, for truly the night is waning, and near is the dawn, and the stars have gone onward. And the night has advanced more than 2 watches, but the third watch is yet left." So they only have about the last third of the night left, and Odysseus wants to get going. So Diomedes does some further gearing up now. He'd already brought his spear and his weird lion skin coat. Now Thrasymedes gives him a sword because he'd left his own at the ship, and a leather cap made of bull's hide. Meriones gives to Odysseus some gear too. He must not have come very prepared either. If only this plan had been discussed back at the camp, where all their stuff is, not out here on the battlefield. Odysseus gets a sword, a bow, and a quiver presumably full of arrows, and a helmet made of boar's tusks that gets a very lengthy description. And that's fortunate too, because we actually have a surviving example of just such a helmet, which really was a Bronze Age style that subsequently went out of use. For so late and contrived as Book 10 is in some ways, this stands out as being very authentic. And I've linked to a photo of the helmet in the show notes. Now, this helmet is a fascinating detail to me. First of all, I love that we actually have one of them still. And it's actually from Mycenae, the city that Agamemnon ruled. And it makes perfect sense to use on this espionage mission. You notice that neither one of them is wearing a metal helmet, right? You wouldn't want the glint of a bronze helmet from a campfire to give you away as you're sneaking around. But my absolute favorite detail is in the little history of this helmet that the narrator gives here. There's a whole chain of ownership. Who's had this boar's tusk helmet previously? But one name in this ownership list stands out in particular, Autolycus, whose name means the wolf itself. Now, Autolycus was a famous thief of a couple generations back, son of the god Hermes, who he briefly owned the helmet before passing it on to an Amphidamas of Cyprus. Autolycus was Odysseus's grandfather, and he gave Odysseus the name Odysseus. This little story goes that Autolycus was asked to name his grandson. Here's the baby. What should we name him? And there was a fairly common tradition among the ancient Greeks of giving a child, a son, the same name as his grandfather. So names would often skip a generation on and off. So that one might have expected him to name his own grandson Autolycus. But the old thief must have been ruminating on some grievances towards the end of his long life of adventures, of theft and trickery and ups and downs. So he said something to the effect that, since I have been angered with many people, both men and women, let his name be Odysseus, meaning I have been angered. I love this detail. I just love it. I love everything about this, the full circle, the understanding of how Odysseus came to be the most cunning of heroes, the fact that he's getting this helmet that his grandfather used to have. I just love it. I love it so much. So now that Diomedes and Odysseus are geared up for their mission, they leave. As they set off into the night, they hear a heron calling out from their right. A good sign. And Odysseus now prays to Athene. Listen to me, thou child of Aegis-bearing Zeus, that ever in all toils dost stand by me, nor doth any motion of mine escape thee. But now again, above all, be thou friendly to me, Athene, and grant that we come back with renown to the ships, having wrought a great work that shall be sorrow to the Trojans. Now, I'm not 100% sure why it's a heron that we're hearing, other than that apparently the herons in that part of the world make a very distinctive, explosive sound whenever they're startled. A number of the ancient Greek gods had birds associated with them. Zeus's was the eagle, Athene's was the owl, but for whatever reason here, maybe just the sound that it makes, the startled sound of the heron reminds Odysseus to ask his patron goddess for help. Diomedes now also prays to Athene. Listen now likewise to me, thou child of Zeus, unwearied maiden, and follow with me as when with my father thou didst follow, even noble Tydeus, into Thebes, when he went forth as a messenger from the Achaeans. Even so, now stand thou by me willingly and protect me. And to thee will I sacrifice a yearling heifer, broad of brow, unbroken, that never yet hath man led below the yoke. Her will I sacrifice to thee, and gild her horns with gold. So in this prayer, he's referencing a time when his father Tydeus fought a bunch of Thebans alone. This was during the war known as the Seven against Thebes. I seem to recall that Athene had actually forbidden him to fight, although it's been a while since I've read that, and the version of it that we have is very late. We have a Roman version of it, although well worth your time, the Thebaid by Statius. I hope to continue this series one day further on to other epics like the Thebaid, so stay tuned. Anyway, after Diomedes' prayer, they continue on into the night. So spake they in their prayer, and Pallas Athene heard them. And when they had prayed to the daughter of mighty Zeus, they went forth on their way like two lions into the dark night, amid the slaughter, amid the slain men, through the arms and the black blood. Meanwhile, over in the Trojan camp, Hector having the same plan. He announces to the gathered Trojans, "Who is there that would promise and perform for me this deed? For a great gift, yea, his reward shall be sufficient. For I will give him a chariot and 2 horses of arching neck, the best that be at the swift ships of the Achaeans, to whoever shall dare the deed, and for himself shall win glory. And the deed is this, to go near the swift-faring ships and seek out whether the swift ships are guarded, as of old, or whether already being subdued beneath our hands, the foes are devising a flight among themselves, and have no care to watch through the night, being fordone with dread weariness." So he's got this very same plan, to send out a spy to check on the enemy, and specifically, in his case, to see if the Greeks look like they're getting their boats ready to leave after yesterday's losses. He promises the volunteer a prize, but not something that he owns, rather the best horses of the Greeks, which would be those of Achilles, which we imagine Hector plans on taking. So he's paying on credit. So confident is he that they're going to win in the morning. Now, at first, none of the Trojans volunteer to go spy on the Greeks for Hector, and they're all quiet until this guy named Dolon speaks up. So this is how this current episode gets the name of the Doloneia. You know how different episodes in the Iliad, I've told you, have like specific academic names? This one's is the Doloneia. And we get a lot of detail about Dolon all crammed into a few lines. He's the son of a sacred herald. He's rich. He's ugly. He can run fast. And he's got 5 sisters. Not sure why we needed all that, but at least some of these things seem to add up to a character who we're supposed to see as unpleasant and greedy, and as we'll see in a moment, someone who distrusts when he should trust and trusts when he should distrust. That's kind of Dolon in a nutshell, in my perspective. So he volunteers to go, but now he requires Hector to lift his royal scepter and swear before Zeus that he really will give Dolon the horses of Achilles. Him requiring Hector to swear, Hector, whom we know to be probably the most honorable man in this whole story, it doesn't really give us a good impression of Dolon. This is the distrusting when he should trust. But Hector does swear, and how he words it is a promise that he ends up kind of being able to keep. "Now let Zeus himself be witness, the loud thundering lord of Hera, that no other man of the Trojans shall mount those horses, but thou, I declare, shall rejoice in them forever." So he's saying that no other Trojan will mount behind the horses of Achilles. And it's true. In fact, no Trojan at all will get at them. It's even referred to as a vain oath. Also notice that he says mount behind, meaning to pull a chariot. Bronze Age horses were small, and they were not used for riding, is my understanding. Only later were horses bred large enough to ride. So now we get the gearing up sequence for Dolon. More weird and specific animals being put on here, and they do seem to imply something about the character. Dolon puts on a wolf skin cloak and a marten skin cap. I'm guessing that these animals are meant to imply something about Dolon. Wolves are maybe predatory and opportunistic. Martens, being weasels, are sneaky. These would be my guesses. He carries a bow and a javelin, and he sets off into the night. So, you've got Odysseus and Diomedes walking one way into the night, Dolon walking another way. The writer could have dragged this out a bit. He could have had Dolon sneaking around in the night, maybe shown him cowering in fear before realizing that, it's just other Trojans that I'm hearing, giving us a little more, but no. Dolon is immediately noticed by Odysseus. There is no time elapsed at all. None of that Dolon sneaking around we could have imagined or anything, just immediately spotted. And Odysseus has a very Odysseus plan. He whispers it to Diomedes. "Lo, here is some man, Diomedes, coming from the camp. I know not whether as a spy to our ships, or to strip certain of the dead men fallen. but let us suffer him to pass us by a little way on the plain, and thereafter we may rush on him and take him speedily. And if it chance that he outrun us by speed of foot, ever do thou hem him in towards the ships and away from the camps, rushing on him with thy spear, lest in any wise he escape towards the city. So the plan is he's going to let Dolon slip past them so that he and Diomedes will be between Dolon and the other Trojans, and then they're going to sneak after him and then rush him with their spears. And if he does get ahead of them, like we get told that Dolon is fast, Odysseus says that they can just herd him toward the ships. They're spies, spying on another spy. This is exactly why I love this episode. There is nothing else like it in the Iliad. Obviously, very non-heroic. It's not the 101 duels that we're used to, but it's a really fun break from that kind of warring. So Odysseus and Diomedes really have to commit to this plan, and now, because Dolon is approaching them. So they hide by laying on the ground, the battlefield ground, among the countless dead left out from yesterday's battle, silently imitating the dead. And Dolon falls for it. He passes them by and continues on toward the Greek camp. Now Odysseus and Diomedes get up and follow him. As they get closer, Dolon hears footsteps and stops. And he hopes it's fellow Trojans coming to tell him, Dolon, come on back. You don't need to do this dangerous thing after all. So maybe Hector's decided to call this off, right? Maybe. But as he hears the footsteps getting closer, something tips him off. He knows something's wrong. He realizes that they're Greeks and he starts running. But he can't run back to the Trojans. He's been cut off. He can only run toward the Greek camp. Now Odysseus and Diomedes sprint after him, as Dolon is running headlong toward the Greek camp and the sentries at the wall. Athene puts strength into Diomedes to give him the glory of capturing Dolon rather than some unnamed sentry character. With a burst of speed, Diomedes comes within striking range and calls out, "Stand! Or I shall overtake thee with the spear, and methinks that thou shalt not long avoid sheer destruction at my hand." Diomedes then throws his spear, not waiting to see whether Dolon will comply with his command to stop, but rather missing his shot on purpose to put overwhelming fear into Dolon's heart. And this plan works. The spear goes right over Dolon's shoulder. You can imagine it whooshing past your ear and sticks into the ground in front of him. Dolon freezes, stammering, before breaking into tears and saying, "Take me alive, and I will ransom myself. For within our house there is bronze and gold and smithy iron, and wherefrom my father would do you grace with ransom untold, if he should learn that I am alive among the ships of the Achaeans. Take me prisoner. Don't kill me. My father is wealthy, and he will pay a ransom for my life." Now Odysseus plays good cop to Diomedes' bad cop and reassures Dolon that we're not going to kill you. We just want to know if Hector sent you out to spy on the Greeks, or if coming out was your own silly little idea. And Dolon is quick to put the blame on Hector, saying, "With many a blind hope did Hector lead my wits astray, who vowed to give me the whole hoofed horses of the proud son of Peleus, and his car bedight with bronze. And he bade me fare through the swift black night, and draw nigh the foemen, and seek out whether the swift ships are guarded as of old, or whether already, being subdued beneath our hands, they are devising a flight among themselves, and have no care to watch through the night, being fordone with dread weariness. Don't blame me. Hector seduced me with the promise of those great horses and the chariot of Achilles. It's not my fault." But Dolon's already given up a valuable piece of military intelligence to the Greeks. The knowledge that the camps of the Trojan allies, mini camps as they're spread across the field, are left unguarded at night. The Trojans are guarding their own camps because it's their city that they're worried about. The allies, they're just sleeping out in the field. Seeing that Dolan is willing to rat out his comrades, Odysseus continues to ask Dolan questions about the arrangement of the camps of the Trojans and their allies, the location of Hector himself, and how well guarded all these various camps are. And Dolan is quick to answer, pressing for more information about these sleeping, unwatchful allies. Odysseus asks for more information. Who are they? Where are they? He's almost casual, though, with Dolan, like a friend asking about a mutual friend. He's playing the good cop, and you can almost hear Odysseus chuckling to himself when he casts doubt on Dolan's ability to even control the horses of Achilles, because he says to Dolan, "Verily now, thy soul was set on great rewards, even the horses of the wise son of Aeacus. But hard are they for mortal men to master, and hard to drive, for any but Achilles only, whom a deathless mother bare. But come, tell me this all truly. Tell all the tale. Where, when thou camest hither, did thou leave Hector, shepherd of the host? And where lie his warlike gear, and where his horses? And how are disposed the watches and the beds of the other Trojans? And what counsel take they among themselves? Are they fain to abide there nigh the ships afar from the city? Or will they return to the city again, seeing that they have subdued unto them the Achaeans?" Dolan easily gives up all of this information. They're all sleeping unguarded, the precise locations of all the different ones. But most importantly, he mentions who among the allies has the most impressive horses. Dolan loves horses. And he says that these would be the Thracians. And while there will be some horse trading tonight, Dolan will not be on the receiving end of any new animals, despite Hector's promise. But we'll come to that soon enough. Dolan, through all this, just doesn't seem to realize the gravity of his situation. He still thinks that he's going to get, away with this. He asks Odysseus, "But bring me now to the swift ships, or leave me here, when ye have bound me with a ruthless bond, that ye may go and make trial of whether what I have spoken to you is truth or lies." Dolan seems to feel that he's just going through the formalities of the capture and ransom process that was common in warfare of the time, and common in this war in the earlier years, just a game that he's playing with these guys. But that phase of the war is over, and neither of his captors, not Odysseus for all of his charm, and certainly not Diomedes, have any intention of playing any more games. Now that they have the information that they need, Diomedes, the bad cop, speaks up again, telling Dolan to forget about escaping. "Put no thought of escape, Dolan, in thy heart, for all the good tidings thou hast brought, since once thou hast come into our hands. For if now we release thee or let thee go, on some later day wilt thou come to the swift ships of the Achaeans, either to play the spy or to fight an open war. But if subdued beneath my hands, thou lose thy life, never again wilt thou prove a bane to the Argives. So if we ransom you, you'll just end up coming back as a spy or a warrior. But if I kill you, you'll never trouble us again." Odysseus is cunning. Diomedes is practical. So Dolan now finally sees how dire his situation is, and he reaches out to touch Diomedes on the chin, and this is the traditional gesture, supplication, begging for mercy. But Diomedes is not, and never was, going to be merciful. With a single stroke, Dolan's head is lopped off, still speaking as it falls on the ground. They immediately loot his corpse and set Dolan's gear aside as an offering to Athene, hanging it from a tamarisk tree as a way of marking the spot where they found it, so that they'll be able to find it on the way back. I'm not sure that Athene really wants a marten skin cap, or as it's translated in the Langleaf and Myers, a ferret skin cap. But the weapons are probably of some value. So the two now continue on into the night, off to attack those Trojan allies, since they learned that the allies have left their camps unguarded, while the Trojans themselves are keeping a watch. And remember that the most valuable thing that they got was the location of the allies of the Trojans who've got those wonderful horses, the Thracians. So they reach the Thracian camp and find them all just lying out, sleeping without a watch, just as Dolon had said. Odysseus whispers to Diomedes, "Lo, Diomedes, this is the man. And these are the horses whereof Dolon that we slew did give us tidings. But come now, put forth thy great strength. It doth not behove thee to stand idle with thy weapons. Nay, loose the horses, or do thou slay the men, and of the horses will I take heed." So it's just a matter of which of them is going to steal the horses, and which of them will go about killing the Thracians in their sleep. But the question is quickly answered as Athene gives strength now to Diomedes. So spake he, that is Odysseus, and into that other bright-eyed Athene breathed might. And he began slaying on this side and on that, and hideously went up their groanings, as they were smitten with the sword, and the earth was reddened with blood. And like as a lion cometh on flocks without a herdsman, or goats or sheep, and leaps upon them with an evil will, so set the son of Tydeus on the men of Thrace, till he had slain 12. But whomsoever the son of Tydeus drew near and smote with the sword, him did Odysseus of the many counsels seize by the foot from behind, and drag him out of the way, with this design in his heart, that the fair-maned horses might issue lightly forth, and not tremble in spirit, when they trod over the dead. For they were not yet used to dead men. But when the son of Tydeus came upon the king, he was the 13th from whom he took sweet life away, as he was breathing hard, for an evil dream stood above his head that night through the device of Athene. So in addition to sending an evil dream to the Thracian king, we have to imagine that Athene is keeping the sleeping men from hearing each other's groans, because none of them wake up during all of this slaughter. And Odysseus is going around grabbing each dead man by the heel and dragging him off, clearing a path so they'll be able to walk those horses out as they plan on stealing them. Oh, and I just want to point out, notice here the very specific numbering of the Thracians killed. 12 Thracians killed, plus the king, making 13. I will get back to these numbers later. We do get explicitly told that Athene helped with the killing of the Thracian king, but the abridged Lang, Leaf, and Myers doesn't make it clear what the Thracian king's bad dream was about. On this point, the green translation is crystal clear, and it's super cool. On the subject of the bad dream that Athene sent to the Thracian king, green translates, "A bad dream stood over his head that night, the grandson of Oeneus, brought there by Athene's wiles." The grandson of Oeneus is, of course, Diomedes himself, both the bad dream standing over him in his mind and literally standing over him, who now kills him with a sword. While Odysseus is stealing the horses, Diomedes is there of two minds, whether he should kill more Thracians or should I try to steal their chariot. As he's thinking this over, tempted by the opportunity for more looting or more murdering, Athene comes up to him silently and says, "Bethink thee of returning, son of great-hearted Tydeus, to the hollow ships, lest perchance thou come thither in flight, and perchance another god rouse up the Trojans likewise." Meaning, it's time to head back. The Trojans are likely to get wise to our shenanigans once one of the gods on their side sees what's going on. So Odysseus is back now with the stolen horses. He led down the path that he cleared through the dead, and he smacks the horses with his bow to drive them running towards the Greek camp. Diomedes and Odysseus running behind. And not a moment too soon are they leaving, because Apollo has seen what they've done in the Thracian camp. And Apollo, furious, storms into the camp and wakes a surviving Thracian named Hippocoon. Upon awakening, Hippocoon at first sees the horses missing, those wonderful horses that had drawn the jealous eye and wagging tongue of Dolon. But then he sees the dead and the dying Thracians still gasping in their death struggles, and Hippocoon groans aloud. Oh! And with this groan, the surrounding camps are awakened. Trojans and their allies filling the scene of the theft and the murder. They finally, Apollo has broken the spell, and they can hear now. The Trojans are loudly remarking upon the deeds before the Greeks even make it back. But in the dark, there's no way for them to know where to go, so there's no pursuit of Odysseus and Diomedes. And the Greeks, they've done something here. They're not beaten. Far from it. Where Hector had sent out a spy hoping to learn that the enemy were defeated in spirit and preparing to flee in their ships, he's instead learning that they still have the will to fight back, even if it's just symbolically, from their weakened position, penned up in their camp, or so Hector had thought. The Greeks have struck back. There will be no peace treaty. There will be no backing down. There will only be complete annihilation for whichever side loses this war. Fleeing through the night and hearing the rousing and clamor of the Trojan camps all around them, Odysseus spots that tamarisk tree and stops the horses. And Diomedes jumps down and quickly gathers the gear that they had looted from the corpse of Dolon. And now they continue driving the horses quickly back to the Greek camp and the relative safety of the fortifications. Waiting back at the Greek walls, Nestor, he hears hoofbeats. And he calls out to the other Greeks with anxiety and far less certainty than we usually hear in his voice. "O friends, leaders and counselors of the Argives, shall I be wrong or speak sooth? For my heart bids me speak. The sound of swift-footed horses strikes upon mine ears. Would to God that Odysseus and that strong Diomedes may even instantly be driving the whole hoofed horses from among the Trojans. But terribly I fear in mine heart, lest the bravest of the Argives suffer aught through the Trojans' battle din." Nestor's uncharacteristic anxiety is quickly relieved, and it's with an almost boyish excitement that he assails Odysseus with questions. "Come, tell me now, renowned Odysseus, great glory of the Achaeans, how ye twain took those horses. Was it by stealing into the press of the Trojans? Or did some god meet you and give you them? Wondrous like they are to the rays of the sun. Ever with the Trojans do I mix in fight, nor methinks do I tarry by the ships, old warrior as I am. But never yet saw I such horses, nor deemed of such. Nay, methinks some god must have encountered you and given you these. For both of you doth Zeus the cloud-gatherer love, and the maiden of Aegis-bearing Zeus, bright-eyed Athene." And Odysseus answers Nestor, "O Nestor, son of Neleus, great glory of the Achaeans, lightly could a god, if so he would, give even better steeds than these, for the gods are far stronger than we. But as for these new-come horses whereof, old man, thou askest me, they are Thracian, but their lord did brave Diomedes slay, and beside him all the 12 best men of his company. The 13th man was a spy we took near the ships, one that Hector and the other haughty Trojans sent forth to pry upon our camp." Now, you will probably notice a very obvious miscounting here. Odysseus is calling Dolon, the spy, as the 13th man that they killed. But remember, the killing scene was very specific with the numbers. They killed 13 Thracians there, 12 regular Thracians, and the Thracian king explicitly was numbered the 13th. So 13 plus Dolon equals 14. I've looked at this passage in 3 different translations, the Green, the Langleaf and Myers, and the Lattimore, and they're all consistent on the numbers. So why does Odysseus misnumber the kills here? And specifically downplaying how many they killed, saying we only killed 13 when you killed 14. I'm not entirely sure, and I kind of did a little digging around the internet and I found a somewhat helpful answer through the Internet Archive, archive.org. highly recommended, where I found a brief article dating back to 1916 titled The Unlucky Number 13 that looks into the history of the number 13 as an unlucky number, as you would think, which, of course, is how we in our culture right now think of the number 13. That's our association with it. But it doesn't seem that 13 as an unlucky number, but it doesn't seem that the number 13 as an unlucky number predates Christianity, with the association with the Last Supper having 13 people at it and then the crucifixion the next day. So it seems like that's where we get our association of 13 as unlucky from. Of course, the Iliad, centuries prior to that. So my guess as to why we have this very obvious miscounting in Book 10 is that it's about presenting numbers that are immediately superior to 12. Okay, and because 12 was a very important number to the ancient Greeks. They had 12 months like us, but also 12 gods. Heracles performed 12 labors. It's an important number that seems to signify completeness for them. So by adding 1 to 12 in both the count during the killing of the Thracians and here at the end, as Odysseus is telling the story of their adventures to Nestor, it gives an exaggerated sense of their accomplishment, that they exceeded the number of completeness in a way that 14 just wouldn't convey. 14 is just a number. 13 is exceeding completeness. That's my guess on it. Okay, so now the heroes are rounding up the loot. The horses are taken to Diomedes' hut for him to keep, while the spoils from Dolon are taken by Odysseus to be prepared for offering to Athene. Then Diomedes and Odysseus, now they bathe first in the sea, and then they bathe in bathtubs, and then they massage their bodies with oil before enjoying a meal and wine. And how many meals have they had this night? I don't even know. It'd take a bit to figure out. The bathing, all of this bathing, likely had, or at least implied, some ritualistic cleansing, purification as their actions this night. While interesting and very different and entertaining for us, there was also a murderous, not heroic quality to them. And so this bathing and this meal is this closing scene of Book 10. So now, let's just move right into Book 11 here. Book 11 opens with the long-awaited dawn after this very long night. Dawn herself personified, rising from her sleep beside her husband, Tithonus. Now, let's just go into this for just a minute here, because Tithonus is fascinating to me. Tithonus was the brother of Priam, but here he is husband of the goddess of dawn. What? The goddess of dawn took Tithonus to be her lover. She loved him so much, in fact, that she asked Zeus to make him immortal, which he granted. He just said, sure. Hey, look at that. Zeus doing something nice for someone. Nope. He decided to be a real jerk about it. In the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite, we hear that Dawn went to ask the dark-clouded son of Cronos that he should be deathless, that is Tithonus, that he should be deathless and live eternally. And Zeus bowed his head to her prayer and fulfilled her desire. Too simply was queenly Eos, that's Dawn, she thought not in her heart to ask youth for him and to strip him of the slough of deadly age. So while he enjoyed the sweet flower of life, he lived rapturously with golden throne Eos, the early born, by the streams of ocean, at the ends of the earth. But when the first gray hairs began to ripple from his comely head and noble chin, queenly Eos kept away from his bed, though she cherished him in her home, and nourished him with food and ambrosia, and gave him rich clothing. But when loathsome old age pressed full upon him, and he could not move nor lift his limbs, this seemed to her in her heart the best counsel. She laid him in a room, and put to the shining doors. And there he babbles endlessly, and no more has strength at all, such as once he had in his supple limbs. Dawn had asked for immortality for her husband Tithonus, but she failed to ask for eternal youth. So Tithonus did indeed live forever, but forever getting older and older, weakness and dementia ever worsening without end. But at this point in the history, as Tithonus' brother to King Priam, who is still living, but an old man, we can imagine that Tithonus is still just regular old like his brother, not unnaturally aged, as he would later become. And so he's still living with Dawn. He's not yet locked away behind those mysterious shining doors. So the dreaded dawn has finally broken over the wide plain between the city of Troy and the Greek camp by the sea. The plain split by the river Scamander and filled with the assembled Trojan and allied armies, poised to finish off the Greek invaders who were beaten back behind their wall yesterday, with most of their best warriors wounded and out of the action. With the dawn, Zeus now sends the goddess Strife. You, in your translation, may see her name translated as Discord, but her Greek name was Eris. It was she who set into motion the events that led to this war. Long ago, she it was who threw the apple inscribed with the phrase Te Calliste, for the fairest, at the three goddesses Aphrodite, Hera, and Athene. It was their dispute over which of them most deserved the apple that eventually led to this moment, the apparent imminent destruction of the Greek army. And Eris did all this for revenge, ostensibly, for not being invited to the wedding of Peleus, father of Achilles, and Thetis, the sea goddess, our hero's mother. But this was an excuse, a ruse, because those three goddesses had nothing to do with the invitation list. Eris threw that apple that caused all this chaos because that's what she does. That's who she is. Discord personified. Now, Eris returns to finish the job. The goddess herself now descends from heaven and stands upon the prow of the ship of Odysseus, that huge black ship beached in the middle of the Greek camp, because from here she can make her voice heard by all the Greeks. We can picture her however we'd like because she's not described. I envision her with a spiteful glee in her eyes. In her hand, we're told, is some signal of war, and whatever that object is, it's surely intended to cause panic. Now, the goddess Eris raises her voice and cried shrilly in a great voice and terrible, the mighty strength she set in the heart of each of the Achaeans to war and fight unceasingly. And straightway to them war grew sweeter than to depart in the hollow ships to their dear native land. This is an eerie image to me, this goddess standing upon the prow of the ship, holding some terrifying object, and in a shrill voice, bringing all of this battle lust into everyone's hearts. It's a strange and eerie sight. Now the war resumes in earnest. If you are reading an abridged version like the Langleaf and Myers, you will go straight into the action. But in a full version, you'll get a detailed gearing up scene focusing on Agamemnon, as the first part of Book 11 follows this character. His armor is unusual, and the detail given here is rich. It's specified that it was given to him by a Kinnerus of Cyprus to gain favor with him. And Cyprus at the time must have been on the distant periphery of the Greek world, and so the specification that this was a gift from such a distant place must imply that Agamemnon was respected and feared far and wide. The armor has 10 bands of dark cobalt enamel, 12 of gold, and 20 of tin, making what's described as something of a metallic rainbow effect. The bands of cobalt form into 3 serpents on either side of his neck. The overall effect must have been one of extreme opulence when metals were the height of high tech and wealth. Finally, there is a reference to the portent that Zeus means by the rainbow. From the Bible, we are used to one interpretation of what rainbows mean, a symbol of a promise that the world will never again be destroyed by flood. But the rainbow does not have that same unvaryingly hopeful meaning in ancient Greek culture. Instead, it means that one of the gods has sent Iris, the messenger goddess. Her name is the rainbow. The rainbow is her path through the sky. And if the gods are communicating something so urgently, likely as not, it's something that's bad. So rainbows, not necessarily good. But there's more to learn here about Agamemnon's ornate battle gear. His sword has gold studs, a silver scabbard, and hangs from his body on golden chains. And his shield has similar exquisite detail. It's also made of multiple metals in bands, this time cobalt, tin, and bronze. But the shield also bears images intended to frighten his enemies. On it are depicted the gods Terror and Panic. These are gods associated with Ares, and a three-headed serpent. As Agamemnon puts on his bronze helm with its horsehair plume and picks up his shining bronze spears, Hera and Athene send out peals of thunder to salute him. Out on the battlefield now, the leaders of each chariot team give orders for their chariot drivers to hold the chariots in order along the ditch, while the leaders themselves, in their armor, lined up on foot ahead of the chariots. And now Zeus himself sends gruesome signs to both armies to begin their battle. He sends out terrible noises and a rain of blood, and among them the son of Cronos aroused an evil din. And from above rained down dew, danked with blood out of the upper air, for that he was about to send many strong men down to Hades. The Trojans were grouped around Hector and the noblemen of the Trojans, Polydamas and Aeneas, and the three sons of Antenor, Polybos, Agenor, and Acamas. Hector himself was now like the lightning of Zeus, shining in his polished bronze armor, appearing here and there among the Trojan army like lightning flickering among the dark clouds of a storm, giving orders and preparing them all for what he hoped would be the final destruction of the Greeks and the threat they posed to Troy. And now the battle starts. And even as when reapers over against each other drive their swaths through a rich man's field of wheat or barley, and thick fall the handfuls, even so the Trojans and Achaeans leaped upon each other, destroying, and neither side took thought of ruinous flight. And equal heads had the battle, and they rushed on like wolves, and woeful Discord was glad at the sight, for she alone of the gods was with them in the war. The men of both sides are compared to the threshermen at harvest time with their scythes, cutting down one another by rows like wheat. The only god present on the battlefield is Strife herself, doubtlessly delighting in the ultimate result of her chaos. The other gods sat apart. Here only those siding with the Greeks are referred to as being resentful of Zeus, who is now giving glory to the Trojans. And Zeus himself is sitting alone and watching and glorying in the carnage. And until noon, the battle is equal. Now, the signs had all been for a Trojan victory, swift destruction of the Greeks and their ships. But then at midday, the Greeks, they broke through the Trojan lines. And in rushed Agamemnon first of all. Here thickest clashed the battalions. There he set on, and with him all the well-greaved Achaeans. Footmen kept slaying footmen as they were driven in flight, and horsemen slaying horsemen with the sword, and from beneath them rose up the dust from the plain, stirred by the thundering hooves of horses. And the Lord, Agamemnon, ever slaying, followed after, calling on the Argives. And as when ruinous fire falleth on dense woodland, and the whirling wind beareth it everywhere, and the thickets fall utterly before it, being smitten by the onset of the fire, even so beneath Agamemnon son of Atreus fell the heads of the Trojans as they fled, and many strong-necked horses rattled empty cars along the highways of the battle, lacking their noble charioteers. But they on the earth were lying, far more dear to the vultures than to their wives. It's Agamemnon who breaks through the lines first. Of course, the reason why this book opened with his gearing up scene is because we're following Agamemnon's course in the battle in the first part of Book 11. This is, of course, the beginning of the Aristeia of Agamemnon. And I want to kind of talk a little bit about the character of Agamemnon here. This is as good a time as any to get into it. Porter, in his article, Agamemnon, the Pathetic Despot, Reading Characterization in Homer, the article's linked in the show notes, he's got some thoughts on the character of Agamemnon. And I have myself emphasized at various points throughout this podcast that I think Agamemnon is an insecure leader. He certainly has gone out of his way at times to emphasize his rule, his superiority to others, in terms of gathering the most loot, to the detriment of the war effort. And gathering loot is part of being a leader in the Bronze Age, a time when people seem to have viewed life in very literal terms, so that loot at that time in history could equal honor. But even then, leadership wasn't just grabbing the most loot for yourself. You'll often see leaders referred to throughout the Iliad with an epithet such as shepherd of his people, implying that guidance and protection was expected of their leaders. It wasn't just, hey, he's the leader because he's got the most stuff. It's noted that while great attention in Book 11 is paid to Agamemnon gearing himself up for battle, he doesn't really lead. He just starts the battle. There's no rousing speech, no demonstration of Agamemnon as a leader other than he's just preeminent in battle right now. It seems as if, in Agamemnon's mind, the leader really is just the guy who gets the most stuff. The one thing you can say for Agamemnon, though, is that he definitely is among the very best warriors. Despite the insults of Achilles to the men of the embassy back in Book 9, Agamemnon is no slouch in battle. Now here, back in the battle, he kills 2 men in quick succession. Bianor, who must have been a leader of some note, because you'll notice here he's referred to as a shepherd of men, and his chariot driver, Oileus, whose death is particularly gruesome. And I know I said I wouldn't go into unnecessary detail in these battle scenes, but I can't help myself here. The description in Green's translation has Agamemnon's spear mashing up as it went, comma, all the brain inside. Ugh. Agamemnon then goes on to kill 2 sons of Priam, who, the narrator relates, had previously been captured and ransomed by Achilles. A reminder that the war has been going on for many years now, and also a reminder that Priam famously had many children. Now, the sources vary, but you can go onto Wikipedia right now and see a list of 68 sons and 18 daughters. What? Agamemnon now comes up against the 2 sons of one Trojan leader named Antimachos. These are Pysandros and Hippolokos. Agamemnon recognizes them somehow. Everyone in the war seems to know everyone else by this point. Again, it's been going on for a while. Now, we don't have any reason to think these men have met Agamemnon before, but they had met Menelaus and Odysseus at a point in the war prior to the events of the Iliad, when those 2 Greeks had gone to Troy to try to negotiate a peace settlement. But their father, Antimachos, at that time had been paid off by Paris to not support returning Helen and her treasure to the Greeks. So now these young men, whose father prevented the peace settlement long ago, now these young men are begging Agamemnon for mercy, asking that he take them captive for ransom. But we're not seeing much ransom anymore in the war. The 2 sides are too dug in. The feelings they're all too hardened. Agamemnon kills both of them. Zeus is now protecting Hector individually from a total Greek rout led by Agamemnon. But Hector did Zeus draw forth from the darts and the dust, for the manslaying and the blood and the din. And the son of Atreus followed on, crying eagerly to the Danaans, and past the tomb of ancient Elos, son of Dardanos, across the midplain, past the place of the wild fig tree they sped, making for the city, and ever the son of Atreus followed, shouting, and his invincible hands were defiled with gore. But when they were come to the Skyan gates and the oak tree, there then they halted and awaited each other. But some were still in full flight through the mid-plain, like kine that a lion hath scattered, coming on them in the dead of night. All hath he scattered, but to one sheer death appeareth instantly, and he breaketh her neck first, seizing her with strong teeth, and thereafter swalloweth greedily the blood and all the guts. Even so, Lord Agamemnon, son of Atreus, followed hard on the Trojans, ever slaying the hindmost man. And they were scattered in flight, and on face or on back many of them fell from their chariots beneath the hands of Agamemnon, for mightily he raged with the spear. But when he was now about coming below the city and the steep wall, then did the father of men and gods sit him down on the crests of many fountain Ida, from heaven descending with the thunderbolt in his hands. So Zeus was drawing Hector away from the fury of battle, protecting him, but Agamemnon was pursuing. So the body of the Trojan army was following Hector, all getting chased by Agamemnon in the fury of his Aristeia. They pass a number of the landmarks on the battlefield that we've seen mentioned many times. The burial mound of prior King Elos, this wild fig tree that's another important landmark. Finally, to the Scaean Gate itself and the oak tree there. Here, the Trojans make their stand against Agamemnon. Now, once Agamemnon reached the gate of Troy, Zeus came down to the top of Mount Ida, which is the mountain looming darkly above Troy, ever wrapped in black clouds, whence he sent down Iris to Hector with the message that, so long as Agamemnon continues to rampage, Hector is to hold back himself, while still encouraging on the Trojans. But once he sees Agamemnon get hit with a spear or arrow and retreat on his chariot, then Zeus will give Hector the power to drive the Greeks all the way back to their ships. So we now know that this rampage of Agamemnon and the pushing of the front lines all the way back to the city gates of Troy won't result in any lasting gain for the Greeks. Hector receives the message from Iris and obeys, hanging back, encouraging the Trojans but not engaging directly, waiting for the expected sign from Zeus that his time for ascendancy has come, the wounding and retreat of Agamemnon.